When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: The Caretaker. User: Frozen T3. Posted July 14th, 1997.
I guess you'd call it isolation. Out here, surrounded by an endless sea of white, staring at these screens day in and day out, the ever-present sound of equipment beeping and electronic fans humming. I've read all the books, listened to every damn cassette at least a dozen times. Time moves slowly when your only companions are silence and snow. My official title is Principal Caretaker of the Biological Containment Unit, but what I really am is a sentinel, humanity's thin line against oblivion. Stationed at this remote, high-tech outpost in a location I dare not expose, I monitor the sleep of something ancient, something monstrous. If this thing ever woke fully and laid eggs unchecked, humanity as we know it would crumble in months. So I diligently wait for signs of it awakening from hibernation and let my superiors back home know it's time. At which point, I cycle out and another caretaker moves in. They discovered it back in 1827, buried deep beneath the ice. It sleeps for decades at a time and seems to only rise long enough to feed. But feed is quite the understatement. This old-time monster leaves a barren circle of destruction and death a minimum of 10 miles wide before burrowing back down again into slumber. That is what it is. We've never tried to stop it from doing its God-intended purpose, and maybe that's because we can't, but the eggs, God, those eggs, that's what needs to be stopped before a half-dozen creatures strong enough to decimate cities are unleashed on the earth. So my task is simple, yet crucial. Watch, track, report. The screens flicker continuously, infrared imaging of frozen ground, seismic readings, and temperature gauges. Sometimes weeks pass without anything happening at all, then sometimes the ice trembles and I hold my breath, fingers shaking over the radio transmitter, praying I won't need to call in the cavalry. It must be moving. While it seems to rise every few years, the wave of true destruction has only happened twice, or so they tell me. And it's in those two times that hell itself erupted from beneath this seemingly calm and sleepy blanket of snow and destroyed everything in its path. The first was in the winter of 1933. The outpost had been running only a few years. One of my predecessors, Arthur Milner, was on watch when the ground split open. A sudden temperature spike set off alarms, startling him awake. Scrambling to the monitors, he watched helplessly as something huge and dark clawed out from beneath the ice, disappearing immediately into the blizzard. Arthur called for backup, and they arrived as quickly as technology allowed, but by then, the creature had nested near an isolated logging town with a population of about 200. It had laid 13 eggs. "Burn them," Arthur's superior ordered grimly. "Burn the whole damn town if you have to." Well, they did. But the eggs hatched faster than anyone predicted, spawning creatures ravenous and unstoppable, beasts that looked as if they were a cross between short-nosed crocodiles and muscular bulldogs, with a coat that suggested some sort of lineage back to woolly mammoths. That little community never stood a chance. Eyewitness accounts, what few survived at least, spoke of nightmares made flesh, beasts with razor-like teeth ripping into flesh as if it was a warm knife cutting through butter. Within days, nothing remained but scorched earth and hollowed buildings. Official records state the town was wiped out by a tragic wildfire. Only those few of us who inherit the caretaker role know otherwise. A few years back, I actually found Arthur's journals hidden beneath the floorboards at the outpost. His guilt had driven him into madness, haunted by screams he could never unhear. I burned those pages, hoping to silence the echoes. The second event happened decades later, in the dead winter of 1978. A man named Robert Collins was stationed here. I know him through old reports, logs scribbled in shaky handwriting. Collins had a heart condition, something nobody thought about when assigning him. One night, during a violent storm, Collins suffered a massive heart attack. He collapsed onto the cold floor, alone and helpless. The outpost went dark, and communication lines were severed by the fierce winds and endless snow. God, the snow. Well, nobody knew what had happened, and meanwhile, 200 miles south, 3 hunters, unaware of what lay beneath the ice, set out tracking elk. Their radio chatter was intercepted by the agency that maintains this place by sheer luck. 2 days into their hunt, the ground cracked open beneath their campsite, and the horror emerged. A hunter named Edgar was apparently taken first, his screams broadcast over crackling radio frequencies, recordings of which I have personally listened to. His colleague Frank emptied his rifle uselessly into the beast, trying to save him as he screamed, but the bullets deflected like pebbles from steel. The only one of the men to make it out alive was a man named Joseph, but his survivor's guilt was so intense that he finished the job of the creature himself less than a week after making it home. Hearing their desperate transmissions, the agency deployed an emergency team, racing northward on snowmobiles and helicopters through blinding white. They found Collins's lifeless body at the outpost, screens dark, alarms silent. They also found the beast circling the area, sensing freedom was near. The battle was brutal. Flames lit up the Arctic night, incendiary weapons finally piercing the creature's thick, fur-covered skin as it retreated back into the earth, leaving behind a blood-stained patch of snow at least 3 acres in size. Had the hunters' frantic warnings not reached attentive ears, humanity might have faced extinction. Now, decades later, it's my watch. Alone in this high-tech tomb, I monitor screens that reveal nothing and everything. I live for the monotonous silence, knowing the alternative is unspeakable. Yet sometimes when the storms howl louder than usual and the screens flicker ominously, I hear whispers, ghostly echoes of that small town's victims, Collins's last gasps and Arthur's madness. They remind me of the stakes. They remind me of my duty. And I remain vigilant, ever watchful, forever trapped between boredom and terror.
Subject, Nebraska. User, Ionix. Posted, August 9th, 1998.
I saw something really unsettling on the news today. A teacher out in some nowhere town in Nebraska was found dead in his own classroom. The news anchors said it was a freak accident. A sudden explosion from the classroom's old radiator sent shrapnel flying, tearing through him in an instant. They called it tragic, unfortunate, a 1 in a million chance, and they even interviewed a couple of people who knew him before switching to the sports guy talking about the Final Four, like that freak accident was just meant to be forgotten. But here's the thing, I know better. See, I saw something just like that once, a long time ago back when I was a little girl, before our town school closed down. Officially, they said it was because of some toxic mold they couldn't fix, but even I knew better. Most of us did. The toxicity wasn't in the walls. It was the janitor. His name was Mr. Holden, and he was quiet, always hunched over, always in the background. He smelled like cigarette smoke and bleach, and his leathered face was the kind that never smiled. He was just there, part of the school, like the creaky floors or the dusty old books in the library. But then, in the winter of '59, things started going wrong and everything changed. The noises were the first notable part. Scraping sounds under the floors during class, loud enough to distract the teacher, but not so bad you couldn't ignore. It sounded like something was moving inside the walls. After about a week of that intermittently going on, the lights started acting funny too. They'd flicker every so often, buzzing angrily like they didn't want to stay on. A girl in my class, Sally Brighton, started telling us she saw something down in the basement when she snuck down there to hide during PE and thought maybe it has to do with that, but didn't want us telling anyone else because she might get into trouble. She said it was something big and really creepy, said it sounded like something slithering. But she claimed she didn't get a good look. Obviously, we thought Sally Brighton was full of shit, but then the vice principal died. Mr. Whitaker was strict, but fair. He was the kind of man who made kids stand up straight when he walked by. We were terrified of him, but we also respected him, and he definitely didn't deserve what happened. You see, one day in the middle of announcements, we heard a loud sound blast through the speaker and echo through the halls. No warning, no nothing. Well, I bet you've guessed already. The radiator exploded. Doctors said he actually died from a heart attack, but Kenny McMurtry swore he saw Mr. Whitaker's face when they wheeled him out and said his mouth was twisted, like he'd been screaming, and his hands were curled up like claws. That's when the school started falling apart. Kids got sick all the time. A handful of teachers just up and quit without warning. The floors, already old, started to rot in strange places, like something underneath was eating away at them. And that smell, something acrid, something wrong, seemed to come from the basement and seep up through the vents. One day, I stayed late. My older sister had practice, so while I sat outside the principal's office waiting for her, swinging my feet, I saw Mr. Holden walking toward the basement door. He had something under his arm, wrapped in an old towel, but I couldn't tell what. I don't know why I cared so much, but I decided to follow the old janitor. Maybe I was just being a curious kid, or maybe something inside me already knew that whatever was happening wasn't normal. Maybe Sally Brighton was right. I crept after him down the stairs, past the old boiler and the stacks of discarded desks. I stayed hidden in the shadows as he knelt down in the middle of the floor, right inside a circle of strange symbols drawn in chalk. There were candles flickering, barely pushing back the dark, and the thing he unwrapped, it wasn't just some old book like I thought. It was a jar. A big glass jar filled with something black, something moving, something slithering. I held my breath as he started whispering. The air in the room went thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on me. The shadows on the walls twisted, stretching out in the wrong directions. Then, just for a second, I saw something else down there with him, something much bigger, something crouched, something with too many eyes. I ran. To this day, I never told anyone what I saw, but I know in my bones that what happened to Mr. Whitaker was not an accident. And when the school shut down at the end of that school year, it had nothing to do with toxic mold. Yet, not a week has gone by in decades that I have not once wondered whatever happened to Mr. Holden. I always assumed the old man didn't have too many more years left in him, but now I'm starting to think that maybe, just maybe, he's in Nebraska.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.